Alistair, how you doing? It's lovely to see you.
Hi Jamie, I'm doing very well, thanks. How are things with you in the US?
They are weird and wonderful, weird and wonderful. All the more so because we're here in January, amazingly, and obviously there's a multitude of Burns events happening across the US. Some in person, some virtual, and indeed the American Scottish Foundation's Burns Supper will be taking place in February. But aye, it's a busy time, and I remember we spoke at this time last year about Burns, and I'm so grateful to for coming back again, because certainly your relationship with Burns and your passion for Burns is magnificent. So hello, thanks for joining me once again.
No, it's a real pleasure. Always delighted to talk Burns.
Thank you, thank you. Those who may have watched our conversation last year will remember that, of course, you have toured around the US playing the Gregg violin, owned by Burns' own dance teacher and thought to be played by Burns. I was wondering if we could talk a wee bit about the Burns Supper itself, if we could focus on that.
Of course, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you. What's your favourite things about a Burns supper? What's your favourite things?
Um, I think just the social aspect of it, and um, I love steak pie, so that's always good, and I love haggis, so that's a good start, and I love whiskey, so that's always a good thing about a one supper. But I think just the mix of music and verse um, and the traditional speeches like the immortal memory and the toast to lassies. I just find it um, a great night out in celebration of our national bard.
Absolutely. And why is a Burns supper so important to Scots? Why is a Burns supper so important to Scots and those who are passionate about Scottish culture?
Well, I suppose historically, I mean, Robert Burns is probably the most famous Scot there's ever been, and the part of the world that we're from, Ayrshire, is right in the heart of Burns country. Obviously, Burns was born in Alloway, and he's buried in Dumfries, not too far from here. So, um, I think we grow up learning about Burns in school, and we have many friends and family who are interested in Burns. And Burns for me is very current, even though Burns died in 1796. Many of his verses and his writings and his sentiments are very, very timeless, and certainly strike a chord, particularly with everything that's going on in the world at the moment. So I think that's one of the reasons that he's been able to embrace a worldwide following, and I I think just his mark in humanity has certainly been his legacy.
Absolutely. And you've performed at Burns suppers all over the world. I believe that of all the musicians that I know, you are probably the best travelled, and with very good reason because of your immense talent. Do you see a common thread at Burns suppers throughout the world? In addition to the programming, do you feel a common thread or feeling or vibe at Burns suppers across the world?
Yeah, I would say I do very much so. Once you're in the venue, I mean, you could be anywhere. I mean, I've been at Burns suppers in China and Kazakhstan and the USA and parts of Europe, and as well as Scotland. And the format of a Burns supper doesn't really change that much. I mean, traditionally, there's a social gathering at the start of the evening. People are piped into the venue by the piper. Then there's the address to the haggis. And I mentioned the ingredients. The immortal memory is certainly a staple part of any Burns supper. There's often recitations. So you might hear a well-known poem like To a Moose, or something a bit more adventurous like Tam O'Shanter or Holy Willie's Prayer. And there's normally a toast to lassies, often a reply. And all of these sections of the Burns supper are interspersed with maybe a song or an instrumentalist or musical content. So the actual format has remained unchanged for centuries.
And do you remember the very first time you attended a Burns supper? Do you remember the very first time?
I do actually, yeah. I was probably about in my early teens, and my late father was a policeman, and one of the largest Burns suppers in Ayrshire was the police division Burns supper. It was quite an event every year. It was always held at Ayr Racecourse, and I was asked to play at that. I was probably about 13 or 14 at the time, and it was quite fascinating just watching the whole thing unfold, because I'd heard a lot about Burns from my father, and he was a real Burnsian and enthusiast and a regular speaker at Burns suppers, and he travelled widely as well. He went to India many times to speak and perform, and as well as Bangladesh and I think parts of the US as well. So I was well kind of grounded in Burns, so I kind of half knew what to expect, but it was a bit of an eye opener all the same going for the first time, and I enjoyed it, and I kind of got into that scene quite young, and for the next few years I played at quite a lot of Burns suppers locally, so I got kind of quite familiar with the vibe of the Burns supper and the celebration that it is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. We are going to show a wee video of you playing on the Gregg violin now from a recent trip to the US, which was a very special moment. And indeed, we hope that you will be returning to the US and Canada very soon. We look forward to that.
Thanks very much, Jamie. I certainly hope I can return to the US in the not too distant future. The trip you mentioned was 2 years ago, just immediately before COVID. In fact, got back to Scotland about 4 or 5 weeks before the lockdown. So it was a fantastic experience, taking the Gregg fiddle all over the US. So I really hope we can do that again at some point.
Absolutely. Well,
thank you very much for having me, and I wish you well, and good luck with the Burns supper.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Jamie.
fairest, fair thee we, thou best and dearest, thine meek, a joy treasure, peace, enjoyment, love and a fond kiss, and then we sever. If it will last forever, deep in heart run tears that pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee.
Good afternoon, Cameron. How you doing? Lovely to see you.
I'm good, Jamie. Good to see you as always, my man. How you doing?
I'm feeling well. I'm feeling well. It's a Saturday afternoon here in St. Louis, and very chuffed to get the chance to talk to you all the way up in Buffalo. How's Buffalo this weekend?
It's freezing cold. I'll tell you that. Freezing cold. 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Bills are playing tonight against the Patriots. Big game, cold game. I'm not sure I'll be able to get out to that. I'm not sure I'll be able to survive that.
I know. I don't even know what sport that is. I'm still so ignorant when it comes to a lot of sport here. What sport's that?
That's what people like us would refer to as American football. But here it is just obviously football. So yeah, it's gonna be a good game. Good game for the Bills tonight, hopefully, and I'll be watching that later. But ground's covered in snow. Absolutely covered in snow.
And do they still go out and play regardless?
They should do. I think they must have had folk on hand clearing it. They're quite good over in Orchard Park. That's where they get the most of the snow. So they're very good at clearing it, keeping the pitch free and keeping them playing, even in a blizzard.
That's cool. I've certainly seen them struggling to clear the snow a few times at Somerset Park for Ayr United.
Yeah, I don't think they've got the same level of equipment or infrastructure in place to clear pitches there.
Not yet, but the sky's the limit. Maybe something like the Newcastle takeover could come. But anyway, I'm so chuffed to see you.
Fingers crossed for United then, my man.
We'll see what happens. So chuffed to see you. I mean, typically January is celebrated as Burns month, but for many of us, you can celebrate Burns the whole year round. It doesn't have to be in January just because that's his birth, but obviously that's typically when Burns suppers happen. And I was wondering if I could chat to you a wee bit about Burns suppers. Do you fancy that?
I love a Burns supper as long as you got some haggis for me.
You can't go wrong with it. You can't go wrong. What's your favourite thing about a Burns supper and why?
Honestly, when I dish my plate up, and I've got my haggis, my neeps, and my tatties, and I just mix them all in together. That's my favourite bit. That's my favourite bit, is mixing them all in together. But on top of that, I think it's just a really important cultural point for us. I've spoken before on webinars and podcasts for the ASF about how even when I was at home in Scotland, I wasn't really as in touch with being Scottish and what it meant and the traditional nature of it. But since I've come to America and I've been living here and obviously missing home and all that, it makes you tap into it a bit more. And a Burns supper, Robert Burns as well, his work, his poetry, his stories, it's all part of that. It's all part of that, true traditional piece of being Scottish. And my favourite part is if someone gets up before the supper actually and does a wee word Burns style, and that really sets the tone for me to smash my haggis, neeps and tatties.
Absolutely. I mean, the food is a big draw, no doubt about it. The entertainment, the feeling of community and hospitality and fun, all very much great fun. Aye, we're actually going to meet at the ASF's Burns Supper next month in New York, which is going to be fantastic. We're going to meet for the first time. That's going to be amazing.
Finally, finally, what's that been? Two years been working together, being pals, been chatting together on FaceTimes and through screens, and finally, I get to see you perform live. I'm buzzing for that.
Well, I'll be expecting to see you up for the reels.
Oh, I'll get in about the mix of it. If I'm able to bring my wife down with me, my American wife, I'll be teaching her a whole bunch of it as well. So she's never done Scottish dancing, seen Scottish dancing, seen a traditional supper. I'm not even sure she'd know who Robert Burns is if I told her, but I can't wait. I can't wait to show her all that and really get her involved in this beautiful, just traditional celebration of Scottishness and togetherness and all things Scotland.
Absolutely. I know exactly what you mean about the moving abroad. Here we're here in the US, and certainly I feel more interested in a lot of elements of Scottish history than I did before, which is ironic, not actually living there. But certainly with Burns suppers and Scottish societies, they're great ways to connect with other people, not just people born in Scotland, but that sense of community is just it's lovely. It's something that we can plug into and make pals from. Great.
And absolutely, it's the one international condition I'd say of being Scottish is Scots helping other Scots. Scots being there for other Scots, and always Scots understanding other Scots, and I just think that's really, really important, for community in general. That's the way it is back home, and I think it's really inspiring to see. We've got all these different Scottish societies that us as the ASF we collaborate with and work with, and it is really that sense of community. And I think it's beautiful when we can bring together everybody and anybody into this community, and especially these events for Burns Supper. It's gonna be a blast, mate. It's gonna be an absolute belter.
It'll be gorgeous. Absolutely. No, I think that's a fantastic and really central point there you raise about community, collaborative work, people accepting each other, celebrating each other and coming together. And for me, that is central to the Scottish identity. Collaboration and fun, that's the way forward.
Absolutely, and as Scots in the US, me and you, it's great that we get to be a part of all this, and that we really do get to have these traditional celebrations for us, because it makes us feel a bit closer to home, right?
Absolutely, and everyone's welcome at the American Scottish Foundation's Burns Supper, which takes place on Friday 25th of February, and it's at the University Club in Manhattan, and it's stunning. It's an amazing place.
I've never seen it. I've only ever been down to New York City, I think 3 times, and that's as a Western New Yorker. That's as someone who lives in the same state as it. I'm excited. It'll be incredible.
It will be, and I do hope you get the chance to bring your wife, your wife, who you recently got married to. Congratulations, Cameron. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, and who knows? I could maybe bring the baby down as well. He's got his tartan trousers. He's got tartan trousers. He's trying to squeeze into his kilt now. We've got my kilt actually that I had for my christening when I was younger. So we're trying to get him into that. We're trying to get him into his wee kilt. So
very much look forward to seeing you at the ASF's Burns Supper on Friday 25th of February, and I believe there are still tickets available, which are available to buy at americanscottishfoundation.org if you are free and fancy having an incredible Scottish experience.
And I'm mandating you, Jamie McGeechan, to wear your kilt.
I will do, but it's going to be freezing, but I will do.
Aye, that's part of the fun. That's part of the
fun. You're not wrong. Well, thank you so much for your time, Cameron. It's great to see you. Congratulations again, and I'll see you very soon, sir.
Thank you, Jamie. Absolute pleasure as always, my man. I'll see you soon, all right?
Thank you so much. All the best, Cameron Steer. Cheers.
Old Duncan the Stout was a man who loved to dance. He'd summon all his clan whene'er he found a chance. First he'd lead them in a toast and command they get in pairs. The dance we dance tonight will be danced for 100 years. So Duncan he taught Patrick, the caller after him, the steps to his dance so it could be taught again. And when Duncan died in battle, Patrick called the clan. Find yourselves a partner and let's celebrate our man. But as the caller takes a swig and drains his mug of ale, the steps he swore he'd learned to lead seem lacking in detail. Holy Moses, my mind's gone blank. Was it 2 steps forward, then another back? It seems unfair of me to call it his. All I know is it was something, something, something like this. Centuries passed and the clan of Duncan grew. His dance was handed down, each caller learning it anew. Then came Arabella Inches, a fearsome woman chief. Not a chink in her armour, except in her left ear she was deaf. And so the day came for the chief to learn the steps. Her predecessor spoke them in his final dying breaths. But as she leaned in to listen, she turned her head to hear, and the steps became entrusted to her only faulty ear. But as she turns to ask the chap to repeat what he said, the old boy gave a final cough, and with that, he was dead.
Holy Moses, my mind's gone blank. Was it 2 steps forward, then another back? It seems unfair of me to call it his. All I know is it was something, something, something like this.
The time arrives for the dance to be passed on. Legend says that every caller somehow hears it wrong. From Duncan to Patrick to Arabella in her stoop, to the chief who thought he'd write it down but dropped it in his soup, to the caller in Rosyth who failed to inform the caller in Kincaid as he told it in a storm. But still it does survive as callers muddle through, and now it's found its way to here to pass to you.
See, traditions, whatever we choose to pass on, and if it can't move with us, you'll soon find it's gone.
And yes, Duncan the Stout may see our steps as strange, but his dance is still here, cause it's been able to change. So when it's time to pass it on, don't worry on what to say. What he's forgotten will be gone, and the rest will somehow stay. Holy Moses, my mind's gone blank. Was it 2 steps forward, then another back? It seems unfair of us to call it his. All I know is it was something, something, something like this.
Green grow the rashes, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, the sweetest suitors I ever spent among the lassies, oh. not but care on every hand, and every hour that passes, oh, what signifies the life of man, and 24 the lassies, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, the sweetest suits I ever spent among the lassies, oh, the warley race me riches chase, and riches still may fly them all, and though at last they catch them fast, their hearts can ne'er enjoy them all. Green grow the rashes, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, the sweetest suits I ever spent among the lassies, oh, but give me canny ready, my arms are burn my TV, oh, and while the cares and while the men, the gang taps at TV, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, the sweetest suits I ever spent among the lassies, oh, for you see do she sneer at this, and that but senseless sassies, oh, the wisest man the world saw, he dearly loved the lassies, oh, all nature swears so lovely dears, and novice work she classes, oh, apprentice hunt she tried on man, and then she made the lassies, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, the sweetest suits I ever spent among the lassies, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, green grow the rashes, oh, the sweetest suits I ever spent among the lassies, oh.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot for auld lang syne? So this presentation is basically entitled, what does it mean to be Scottish? What does it actually mean, that song, when you hear that song by Robert Burns, Auld Lang Syne? It means many things, I suppose, to many people. And I think that, as Donald McLaren said, trying to identify what it means to be Scottish, there are so many things, and it does mean different things to different people. That's, of course, one of the most famous songs in the world. It might mean to you, Robert Burns, it might mean brotherhood, sisterhood, fraternity. It might mean your family. It could mean memories of your mother and father singing songs together about Scotland. I think for me, it probably means all of the above, and probably for a lot of people watching this presentation, it probably means the same. Robert Burns for me actually means many different things as well. Currently, that's what it means to me at the minute. As Gus said, I started a campaign in Greenock, which is one of the very few Scottish towns without a statue of Robert Burns. Surprising, since it is the home of the world's first and oldest Burns Club, the Greenock Burns Club, the mother club, formed in 1801, just 5 short years after the poet's untimely death. I commissioned that maquette, and it's a magnificent maquette from Her Majesty's Sculptor and Ordinary, Professor Alexander Stoddart, and we'll be starting a campaign to raise the funds for that statue, because it will be fantastic. Should all the acquaintance be forgot? I've put a question mark there, but in fact, it's not a question in Burns' particular song. It really is saying, if we were to let our memory of our friends fade, then here's things that we could do. Because Burns doesn't want friendship to be forgotten. He doesn't want our roots to be forgotten. And perhaps that is more difficult to remember your Scottish roots if you live outside of Scotland. Although, as Camilla said just a few minutes ago, the Scots who live outside of Scotland are often more Scottish than we Scots who live inside. So what does it mean to be Scottish? Well, some people may think of great Scottish heroes like Sir Walter Scott, the inventor of the historical novel, Robert Louis Stevenson, the author of Kidnapped, Treasure Island, Jekyll and Hyde, or Dr. David Livingstone, the great African explorer, missionary, and humanitarian. Or perhaps John Loudon McAdam, the man who invented the tarmac that we drive our Fords and our Chryslers on today. Thinking about being Scottish, you could be thinking about heroes like perhaps the world's greatest ever philanthropist, Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in the world, who gave up his fortune to build libraries and other educational institutions to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor in educational terms. You might also think of great Scottish inventors like the father of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, and the father of television, John Logie Baird. Perhaps you might think about this chap here, Sir Alexander Fleming, the man who discovered penicillin and who is therefore responsible more than any other human being ever to exist on this planet for saving more lives. But I should suspect that for some people, perhaps that man there might be the one who identifies as a Scot, Sir Sean Connery. These are all great Scottish heroes, but I would suggest that for a lot of people who are American Scots, for them, what it means to be Scottish might be more this type of person. It might be more the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents who emigrated from Scotland across the Atlantic, probably actually from Greenock, where I currently am just now, to find a better life for themselves. We're sailing west to prairie lands, sun-kissed and blessed, the Crofters' Trail to Happiness. I'm going to introduce you to a Scot, someone who I think is actually a great Scot, and someone who I think makes being Scottish really interesting, and someone who perhaps you have never even heard of. He's called Colin Ray Brown. He was born on the 19th of December, 1821 in Greenock. And for the people amongst you who are good at math, you will probably realise that in a week's time, that will be 200 years ago to the actual exact date. That's a painting of Greenock from 1811. I don't think Greenock had changed much in the 10 years between that painting and the birth of Colin Ray Brown. Of course, it has changed quite a bit now. And as I said before, very possibly for a lot of people who are on this presentation just now, that will be the place where your ancestors last touched Scottish soil, because the boats travelled across the Atlantic from those docks which you see in the distance there. So Colin Ray Brown, why is he important? He's important for many, many reasons, and he's absolutely central to this talk about why or what it means to be Scottish. On a personal level, as a past president of Greenock Burns Club, he was a past president of Greenock Burns Club. But he was also the main author, the man with the idea and the big organiser of the Burns Centenary in 1859. He was the man who came up with the idea and raised the money for the Wallace Monument. He founded the London Burns Club. He was hugely influential in the statue of Burns in Glasgow's George Square. He raised a large amount of money in London when he moved down there to complete the Scott Monument in Edinburgh. He was the man who got the statue of Burns built on Thames Embankment in London. He was the man who got the bust of Burns placed in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. But perhaps the most important things that he did were to co-found the Robert Burns World Federation and to be the person who proposed and who drove through the first publication of the Burns Chronicle. The Burns Chronicle is probably the greatest example of Burns knowledge and Burns scholarship that we have in the world. He was also the person who got the Highland Mary statue at Dunoon. And his interest in Robert Burns came about in 1842 on the 25th of January, the poet's birthday, when he attended the foundation stone laying of Highland Mary. And this event really, really inspired Colin Ray Brown to become what he termed a sincere disciple of Robert Burns. He attended the very first national demonstration of Burns, which took place in 1844. He was a very young man when he went to that, but it clearly had a big effect on him. This idea of people getting together to express their admiration for Scottish culture had a huge influence on Colin Ray Brown, to the extent that that particular structure, which you see there, and of course you will recognise as the Wallace Monument, the idea of having a monument to a great Scottish hero like Wallace came from Colin Ray Brown. He never really got the credit for it, but it did in fact come from him, and it came from him through his newspaper contacts. He wrote many articles basically promulgating this idea to have a national monument built for Wallace. And it was the first of many monuments that he was involved in, many memorializations that he was involved in for great Scottish heroes. In January 1858, he was at the Brigadoon in Ayr, and he suddenly realised that in a year's time it would be the Burns Centenary, 100 years since the birth of the poet. Colin Ray Brown, with that amazing ability which the Victorians had, that amazing confidence that yes, we can do it, he set about organising a worldwide festival. This is at a time where there were barely telegraphs. A worldwide festival. He wrote to every town, city, club or association, both at home and abroad, as he said, who sincerely adopt as their creed, a man's a man, for all that. At that particular celebration that year, there were over 1,200 separate events in honour of Robert Burns which took place. They were all over the United States. They were all over the Empire, and also in France, Switzerland, and Denmark. This was long before television, long before telephones, long before the internet. It was basically writing letters to people, trying to organize things all over the world. It takes an incredible confidence and an incredible amount of enthusiasm and energy to do that. That celebration was described as a spectacle unprecedented in the history of the world. And the festival brought a national and international distinction to Scotland. But what it really did was it started to unite Scottish clubs, societies, and organisations worldwide. He felt that statue building was really the way to memorialise poets and great heroes, monument building. And in fact, that statue in George Square in Glasgow is an amazing statue, not because it's the greatest Burns statue ever, but because of Colin Ray Brown's idea of bringing working class people into being involved in the memorialisation project. Previously, statues were generally built from large donations by wealthy individuals. But Colin Ray Brown, through his newspapers, he proposed the idea of all the working classes in Scotland getting involved by paying a shilling subscription. And in fact, that shilling subscription turned out to be by far the largest amount of money which built that statue in George Square. In fact, for the opening, the unveiling of that statue in George Square, there were 100,000 of the working classes turned up because they felt ownership. They felt that they were part of a Scottish cultural event. He moved to London, Colin Ray Brown. He formed the London Burns Club, and he persuaded a very wealthy Glasgow businessman who was London-based, called John Gordon Crawford, to join that club. No sooner had he joined than he twisted his arm and asked him to pay for a statue of Burns in London, which was unveiled in 1884. That statue by Sir John Steele, Her Majesty's sculptor in ordinary at the time, is actually the most copied Burns statue in the world. Those of you who are in New York will recognise it. There it is in Central Park. If there's anyone in Dundee, in the north east coast of Scotland, then you'll recognise it as your own Burns statue. And if you're in Dunedin, in New Zealand, you will recognise that that is the same statue of Burns in Dunedin. That idea that Colin Ray Brown had for the shilling subscription for the statue in George Square, he then took to the idea of having a bust of Robert Burns placed into the National Church, the very centre of the empire, Westminster Abbey. Westminster Abbey had a Poets' Corner, and right in the centre of that Poets' Corner was, of course, William Shakespeare. Colin Ray Brown decided that really to be an equal part of the Union at a time where there was no hint, there was no desire, there was no need for Scottish political independence. Scotland was part of the world's greatest empire at the time, and so in order to be an equal part of that, the idea of what they called unionist nationalists was that these cultural events would be as important to show Scotland's place in the empire as they would be to show England's. And in fact, he was responsible, again, for having the bust of Robert Burns placed right at the centre of the British Empire, the actual beating heart of the empire. Robert Burns, a man who wrote in Scots, sits right next to the greatest English writer, William Shakespeare. And that's hugely significant in a Scottish cultural context. It was after the unveiling of that Colin Ray Brown was walking from Westminster Abbey to the statue of Burns on the embankment with two gentlemen from the Kilmarnock Burns Club, Captain David Snedden and David Mackay. They were talking about the 1886 forthcoming anniversary of Burns' first edition, the Kilmarnock edition, poems chiefly in the Scottish dialect. And the conversation turned at that point to a federation of Scottish clubs and societies based around a love for Robert Burns, but really to bring together disparate Scots from around the world into one organisation. That picture that you see there is actually the former George Hotel, and that is where the Robert Burns World Federation first had a meeting. And in the chair for that meeting was Colin Ray Brown. He wanted that organisation to bring together clubs, societies, or anyone who had a love of Scotland and Scottish culture. In fact, if there's anyone who could tell what it meant to be Scottish, then they should be joining that particular organisation. That is what Brown thought. And that picture there is actually, I took that picture a few weeks ago. It's on the wall at Greenock Burns Club. That was presented to Greenock Burns Club on the 21st of April in 30th of April in 1886. And that is their federation charter. The last great thing that Brown did was that book which you see in front of you. That was the Burns Chronicle. The Burns Chronicle is still published to this very day. It is an amazing resource of not just Burns literature, but Scots literature and culture in general. It's an incredibly interesting book. There have been many, many PhDs about Robert Burns and Scottish literature which have been written using that book as a main resource. It was wholly devoted to the interests of Burns students, being the official organ of the Burns Federation, Burns clubs, and Scottish societies throughout the world. So why am I telling you all of this? That picture there, by the way, is the unveiling of Highland Mary's statue at Dunoon, which Brown was deeply involved in. And in fact, it was the last thing that he was involved in before he passed away. But the reason I'm telling you all this is because the idea of what it is to be Scottish, it means so many different things to us, and it is extremely difficult to pin down. But what is absolutely clear is that people want to express their Scottishness. And it's the very idea which Colin Ray Brown had of wanting to celebrate, wanting to see what happened in the past, but move forward with it now in a Scottish context, which really actually is what it means to be Scottish. It doesn't really matter where you're born. It doesn't really matter what your ancestry is. The thing that matters is, do you love Scotland? Do you have a love for Scotland? And do you want Scotland and Scottish culture to continue and to progress? Certainly at the Robert Burns World Federation, we do. We're extremely proud to be working now with the American Scottish Foundation as a directed giving project. The Federation it launched this particular relationship on the anniversary of Burns' first supper at his birthplace in Alloway. We look to expand our work, our desires, our ethos all over the world. We have currently 204 clubs. We have clubs in North America, Canada, the US. We have clubs in Argentina. We have obviously clubs in Australia, New Zealand, in Fiji, in Hong Kong, Singapore, anywhere really that Scots moved to, that Scots emigrated to, that Scots wanted to take their culture to. There is a real heritage footprint which comes from Robert Burns. He's worth £203 million per annum to the Scottish economy. And it's incredibly important for Scotland that we are still giving out the message of Robert Burns. The Federation is regarded as one of Scotland's most distinguished national and international organisations. It encourages and arranges competitions, both spoken word and music, especially amongst children. It stimulates and develops the study and the teaching of Scottish literature, art, music and language, not just through Burns, but through other great Scots writers like Scott, Stevenson and John Galt. It seeks to strengthen the bond of fellowship amongst members of Burns clubs and kindred Scottish societies by encouraging them to honour the memory of Robert Burns' life and works. And I don't have to tell you that it is successful in that way. Probably you know about the recent survey from Glasgow University by Dr. Paul McGratty from the Centre of Robert Burns Studies, which showed that there are between 5 and 10 million people every year who attend a Burns supper in the world. I don't know how many of you have ever been to a Shakespeare supper. I've certainly never been, and I love Shakespeare. I would go if I knew there were any. But it's incredible the fact that the Scottish nationhood has really been placed upon the shoulders of that figure of Robert Burns all over the world. Apart from that, the Federation conserves and it supports places associated with Burns like the Cottage, the Birthplace Museum, Ellisland, the House in Dumfries, and countless statues and monuments throughout the world. Our schools competitions see thousands of children every year taking part and learning the works of Burns, learning the Scots language, learning Scottish culture to a great extent. The relationship with the American Scottish Foundation is something which we believe is going to strengthen the bonds of fellowship in Scottish cultural societies through Robert Burns. And there are details on our website and the American Scottish Foundation website of how to become a member of the Robert Burns World Federation to help the ethos and to help push forward Scottish culture through Burns. So, what have we done recently? Well, we had a really wonderful conference in September in Paisley, where a personal and posthumous coat of arms of Robert Burns was presented by the Queen's Lord Lion. Robert Burns, for those of you who don't know, was a very keen amateur heraldist, and he was very, very interested in having a coat of arms for himself created by the Lord Lion. Unfortunately, he passed away without having seen that through. He didn't really have the money, to be honest, to do it. And it has always been a bugbear for me to know that Burns wanted one and he never got one. We spoke to the Lord Lion, who is a very keen Burnsian himself and who proposes the immortal memory countless times a year. The Lord Lion actually said, "I've been waiting for the Federation to do this." It was a wonderful occasion when we were presented with the arms of Burns, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that in a moment. We're inaugurating this year a North American writing competition for the year of the Scottish stories, the written word. We have opened in our headquarters in Kilmarnock in Ayrshire a new Scots language learning unit. And on top of this, the schools competition, as I said before, sees thousands of school pupils understanding, memorising and performing the works of Burns and other Scottish authors. In fact, during COVID, the work of the Federation was recognised by no less a person than the Duke of Rothesay, Prince Charles, who, because, as a keen Burnsian himself, because he, like the rest of us, was unable to attend a Burns supper live, asked if we would put out a message from him. You can see that message on our website. It's an absolutely heartwarming message from the Prince of Wales to Burnsians all over the world. There you'll see the coat of arms, which was presented by the Lord Lion at our conference in September, and it's incredibly significant. What Robert Burns asked for, or what he wished for, was the shield, which you see in the middle, with the holly bush and the shepherd's pipe and the shepherd's crook, with on top the woodlark perched upon the sprig of a bay tree. Burns also asked or wished for the two mottos, wood notes wild and better a wee bush than nae bield, which basically translates as a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. All the other things which Burns didn't ask for because he knew he wouldn't get, all those other things were granted by the Lord Lion, and they have tremendous significance heraldically to show the importance of Robert Burns to the nation. On the left, as you look at it, you'll see a collie dog, a border collie. That represents one of the Twa Dugs, one of Burns' most famous poems. On the right, you'll see an old grey mare with scarce a stump. That, of course, refers to Tam O'Shanter's old grey mare, Meg, who lost her tail when it was clocked. She was clocked by the rump by one of the witches that was pursuing them. It's a compartment where they are standing, and that compartment is populated with red roses and mountain daisies, obviously two of the most popular flowers in Burns poetry. But perhaps the most significant thing is the flag, which is being held by the collie on the left. That, of course, is the national flag of Scotland, the St Andrew's Saltire. To be given the national flag of Scotland shows the national importance, the international importance of Robert Burns. And of course, you'll see that the shield is resting on an old brig, which is the old brig of Ayr, and the river which is flowing through it is the Bonnie Doon. So we were delighted and thrilled to be given that by the Lord Lion. And in fact, shameless advertisement from myself. That's me and my family with the Lord Lion, the Reverend Canon Dr. Joseph John Morrow, at the conference when he had just presented the coat of arms for Robert Burns. We will be coming to Tartan Day. The Robert Burns World Federation will be at Tartan Day with the Lord Lion, and we will be showing Burns' posthumous grant of arms to the people of North America at Tartan Day. The following year, 2023, we will be having our conference in Calgary in Alberta. So it would be fantastic to see as many interested Scots as possible coming to both of those events.
Does heather as far as the eye can see? The rain falls, but that's alright with me. From the highlands in Glencoe, you'll feel it. From the people in the nightlife, you'll feel it. Over mountains and across the oceans, no matter how far you go, through the cities from coast to coast, let the rivers in your Celtic heart flow. Over mountains and across the oceans, no rivers in your Celtic heart and flow. From coast to coast, let the rivers in your Celtic heart